Hello everybody, I'm Justin and I read and write a lot of books. Well, I read more books than I write, but I do like to write books and stories. My house is absolutely full of books, so many that I really honestly don't even know how many I have. But I just wanted to show you some of them today, show you some of the ones that I enjoy, some of my favourites, and I will do more in-depth looks at the books later on my YouTube channel. So I'm going to start with my favourite author, which you can probably guess looking at the bookshelf behind me, is Stephen King. And I've been reading him for many, many years, since I was probably about 14. I think the first book that I read by Stephen King I started with his short stories, and it was The Skeleton Crew. Here I have in an omnibus with different seasons and The Skeleton Crew all together. And my favourite story out of The Skeleton Crew was The Monkey. It's a short story about a evil clockwork wind-up monkey that has the power to kill people or make bad things happen when it clashes its cymbals. And that was a very exciting read. After that, I went on to reading Carrie, his first published novel, and one that apparently his wife took the manuscript out of the rubbish bin because he'd thrown it away because he didn't want to continue writing it. And she said, "You've got to continue writing this book." And so I've got almost everything Stephen King's ever written. So many of them, I don't even know how many. Paperbacks, hardbacks. I've got duplicates of some of them because some of them I started reading in paperback and then thought, I'd like a nice shiny hardback version of that novel. And so I have, like Dumarquis, for example. I first picked Dumarquis up off the shelf of the book sharing shelf at work when I was working in the character department of Disneyland Paris. And I did have the paperback version of that next to me here somewhere, but I'm surrounded in books and I can't see where it is right now. So I'll show you the hardback copy. Dumarquis, yeah, it's a good one. I like it. Supernatural horror, a good story. My favourite books of Stephen King are probably, my all-time favourite is Insomnia. I love this book. It's a story about Ralph Roberts. He's an elderly gentleman who loses his wife. His wife dies. I think it's of a brain tumour or brain cancer or something like that. And he starts losing sleep, and then he starts hallucinating, and he hallucinates that he sees people's auras and kind of like balloon strings coming out of their head. All sorts of mad stuff happens. He meets three bold doctors, Clothos, Lachesis, and Atropos, I believe their names are, and they are the three fates from the Greek mythology, one that spins the yarn of life, one that measures it, and one that cuts it to end the life. And it's an absolutely brilliant novel. I'll talk more about it another time. But moving on, I think my second favourite novel by Stephen King, The Regulators. Absolutely fantastic story, really fast pace. It's written under Stephen King's pseudonym, Richard Bachman, who I absolutely love when he's writing as Richard Bachman or publishing under the name of Richard Bachman. It's Stephen King, but it's gruesome, dark, and hopeless, basically, mainly in the Richard Bachman stories. But that one is one of my favourites as well. Bag of Bones, yeah, that's a good one. Bag of Bones, another supernatural ghost story. And that's a really good one. Rose Madder, you hardly ever hear anybody review or talk about a woman that escapes an abusive relationship. Her husband's a cop, and he tries to track her down And there's a little bit of fantasy involved in that one as well. She goes inside a painting and finds another world, and she lures her husband to it, and he, spoiler alert, gets killed by a giant spider creature inside that other world for his nastiness in real life. Oh my goodness, I've got so many. So other books, I've got quite a lot of Dean Koontz as well, and I've got a biography of Dean Koontz as well I thought was very interesting. Richard Lehman. Okay, so Richard Lehman is endorsed by Stephen King, who says if you've missed Richard Lehman, you've missed a treat. I like Richard Lehman's books. I wish that I'd discovered his books when I started reading as a young adult or a teenager, because I think that with all the teenage stories that come in his books, I think that would have been something that I would have really enjoyed as a younger reader. Richard Lehman's cool. I've got some old Christopher Pike novels. They were a throwback from my younger days. I bought a few of those off eBay. Stephen King's son, Joe Hill. I've got some of his books. He's also a brilliant writer. If you're going to start off with Joe Hill, I would highly suggest you starting with 20th Century Ghosts, a collection of short stories. That's a great one. Next, Heart-Shaped Box. Brilliant. It's a box about someone who buys a ghost on eBay attached to a suit, and all sorts of horrific things happen. Horns, a guy that starts to grow a pair of horns, and with those horns come supernatural powers, and this is an absolutely fantastic book. Also made into a movie with Daniel Radcliffe, if you want to watch that. But I would suggest reading the book, or read the book first before you watch the movie. But the movie is very good too. Nosferatu, or NOS4R2 in the English version of the book. And that is just an incredible novel about a vampire kind of creature with a magic car that goes around kidnapping children and taking them to this theme park, this otherworldly theme park where they turn into kind of like vampire creatures. Thrilling novel, that one is. And what else would I like to talk about? Probably so many of them. I've got so many of them that I could talk about. Apart from, here's a good horror novel if you want to read. Hex by Thomas Olderhoyvelt. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's about and this one's endorsed by Stephen King as well. This book is totally, this is totally brilliantly original, apparently he says about this book. And it is. It's a very good story about people who live in a village, but inside this village there is a ghost, and this ghost is of a witch, and it haunts the village, and she's a real witch, and she has sewn up eyes and a sewn up mouth. And if you buy a house and live in this town, you can't leave, because if you do, you'll die. But then if you're living in this town, you might not be safe, because the witch has got some grievances and she is not one to be messed with. But a great book. Non-fiction, I also read a lot of biographies. I am quite entranced with the work of Gilbert and Sullivan. And I have a lot of books about Gilbert and Sullivan, and one book about Gilbert, and one book about Sullivan as well. But yeah, I'm into that stuff. William Shakespeare. I am from Warwickshire myself and studied drama in performing arts in Stratford-upon-Avon, hence why I've got a comedy and tragedy tattoo with all the world's a stage written on it. The best book, don't mean a lot to you because it's missing its dust jacket, but the best book about Shakespeare I've got is the Peter Acroyd Shakespeare, the biography. Very, very interesting. But I've also got a lot of others. I've got about 3 books by James Shapiro, 1599 and 1601. Very interesting books. I've got Will Contested as well. And I've got a book by Sir Stanley Wells as well called Shakespeare and Company, about Shakespeare's fellows, his fellow actors and dramatists and the people that he associated with. The interesting thing about Shakespeare biographies are that they're all quite speculative, because not a lot of information exists about his actual life, and everybody wants to know. Germaine Greer wrote a book about Shakespeare's wife, and I thought this was going to be incredibly interesting, and there are some very, very interesting parts of this book, but it is, of course, very speculative, because nobody ever actually interviewed Anne Hathaway, and we don't know what her opinions or what her actual life was like. We don't know what Shakespeare's was like. Another good book I'd like to tell you about is The Pantomime Life of Joseph Grimaldi, England's first clown, and he actually invented clowning as we know it. He was the first one to paint his face all bright colours and wear bright, colourful costumes, and he was the Georgian most famous pantomime performer of his time, of Regency Theatre, and that's a really interesting book as well. And at the time, when I was performing clowning in London, I did a performance in one of the Joseph Grimaldi church services for the memorial of his death, and they described my clown act in the opening chapter of this book, which is quite interesting. So many books that I would like to tell you about. If you want to hear more, or if you want to me to go in deeper about any of the other books, then let me know and I'll try and do that for you. Okay, I'm sorry this video has been a bit rambling, but I hope you get the picture, and I'll do some more at some point soon.